The last couple of weeks, we have been going over the OB changes that are coming in 2027. So we've talked prenatal, we've talked delivery codes and labor management. And so this week, we're going to talk about the postpartum care and how that integrates into everything.
Welcome to NatRevMD, a podcast where we share tips on optimizing medical billing and improving practice efficiency so you can have the business of your dreams. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Signorelli, founder of NatRevMD. Let's get started.
So I was grateful enough to have Amy and Maria on our team, who are OB specialty coders, who have been helping us prepare for this change in 2027. I do want to share that I do think that this is all doable. I'm hopeful that this provides more revenue for practices as long as you guys are documenting. And so if you guys haven't listened to those first few OB podcasts, please go check those out. This is part of a 5-part series. So last week, we said the work was always there, right? Now it's about getting paid. So you were always doing all of this work and you were getting paid as a lump sum, but that didn't always inherently reimburse you for complex patients. And so this week, we're going to be talking about postpartum care, and that is going to be moving to billing similar to prenatal care. So hospital rounds become individually billable, outpatient checkups do as well. And so every day you round on the patient, every calendar day, with one exception, is basically new revenue for your practice. So the one exception is important to understand. And I think it may cause problems if you're not thinking about it and having a specific workflow around this in preparation for January. So today we're going to cover that postpartum care and how to bill hospital rounds, how to handle those outpatient follow-ups, and how to just think about these same-day traps when it comes to the delivery and what's wrapped up into that delivery. So just a reminder, right? We all know that codes 59430, so that's that postpartum care only code, is going to be deleted, similar to multiple other codes that are deleted. And all of the other partial global codes that we've already covered are all gone, right? So now all postpartum care is moving to E&M billing. So that's going to be the same framework as the antepartum care. Every encounter is going to have its own code, its own documentation, which we've talked about how important that is, its own claim. Now, there are going to be two separate settings, right? There's the inpatient setting, which is your hospital rounds, and then the outpatient, which is going to be your office visits. And obviously, those are going to have different codes. Your inpatient hospital postpartum rounds are going to be those subsequent hospital care codes, the 99231, 32, 33, and you're going to use these for daily rounds after the date of delivery. And discharge day management is 99238 if the discharge time is 30 minutes or less, or 99239 if it's over 30 minutes. And you're going to use these on the day the patient goes home. Now, every rounding day after delivery on a new calendar date, and this is important, is a separate billable encounter. Under the global model, your daily rounds were bundled into the delivery fee. And now every day you round on that patient, with one exception, you are going to bill a separate charge. That is going to be, revenue that you want to make sure that you're capturing to count for the global charge that you were getting previously. And key here, like we talked about before, is documentation standards are going to be important, right? So the hospital rounding note has to support the level that you billed. And so the one-liner does not support a 99233. And so you really have to have a note reflecting the assessment, the data reviewed, management decisions, et cetera, so that you can qualify for the right level of care. And I think that this is where it's going to be really, really important, because before you were getting $3,000, $2,500, whatever your global fee was, and that included all the prenatal visits, included the delivery and the postpartum care. And if you don't make sure that you're billing out the right level of complexity along the way and documenting for that, that's where you could potentially either not see a patient enough times or document enough complexity to hit that same global revenue that you were getting before. I'm optimistic that the way that the system is set up is that it will get close. But these are the sort of things you want to make sure that you document correctly and that your providers are used to that, so that these things are hardwired now and not in January. So outpatient postpartum office visits are going to be the standard office codes, your 99212 through the 99215s, again, with that modifier TH for the maternity-related care. So again, same framework as we talked about with Maria in the antepartum state. Telehealth postpartum visits, you're going to use those same 99212 through 99215 codes with the telehealth modifiers, again, like you have been doing, and not And so there's no separate code set for those. Now, the code's obviously the same. It's just those modifiers that are changing. So the key here is that documentation has to support the level. So this is where, we chatted with both Maria and Amy in the last couple episodes that the one-liners, the flow sheets, the things aren't going to be simple one-liners that are going to be key here. So you really have to tell the story, right? So incision healing well, cleared for activity is a 99212. But managing postpartum hypertension with medication adjustments, a wound infection, or, positive depression screen with a management decision, now that's where you're going to get those higher level E&M codes. And so really, really critical, again, to document all of the things that are going on in the visit. Again, we talked about the modifiers. TH on those postpartum E&M codes is going to be able to communicate to the payer that these are in the maternity context and not outside of that. And so really, really important to make sure that that is done. As you guys know, we are doing a webinar on this topic next week, July 7th. So please head on over to the show links and register. If you aren't able to make it live, no big deal. The registration will have a recording that we'll send out if you have registered. And we're going to really talk about documentation and just making sure you're set up for success ahead of January's changes. All right. So I do want to cover the same day trap and make sure that you guys are thinking through how this is going to impact billing. So basically what the AMA rule around same day postpartum care says is that postpartum codes cannot be reported on the same calendar date as the delivery code. So same day postpartum management is going to be included in that delivery code. And so this is the rule for, the new codes. So calendar date basically means midnight to midnight, not a 24-hour from delivery time. And so the calendar flips at midnight is what matters. So if you deliver it at 8 a.m. on Tuesday, same day coverage runs until 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, right? That same day. So any rounding done on Tuesday is going to be included in that delivery code. Now, obviously, you need to round when you need to round clinically, but say the flip side of that is you have a patient who delivers at 11 p.m. on Tuesday, and that delivery code covers through 11:59 on Tuesday. So then rounds the next day at 8 a.m. are going to be a new calendar date and a separately billable event. So just important to make sure that you understand that. Again, your workflows and when you see patient oftentimes have to do with how the patient is doing. Are they discharging the next day, et cetera? And so again, this is more just important for you to understand how this may be billable and when you need to add that additional CPT code and an additional note in order for it to be a separate billable event. So obviously this rule is simple, but you do just want to make sure that you're not getting tripped up because the billing team, you and the billing team are going to have to coordinate how to drop those charges so that we're looking at timestamps and paying attention. And a good footnote on multi-providers, and this is where most practices may get tripped up. So if Dr. Smith does the delivery at 8 a.m., Dr. Jones covers the afternoon shift and rounds at 4 p.m., that 4 p.m. visit is still included in the different delivery code, even though it was a different provider performed it. Now, again, that's obviously within the same group. So Dr. Jones cannot bill for that visit, even though they didn't do the delivery that morning, because the delivery code, again, covers same day postpartum, regardless of the provider from the same group who performs it. So your practice just needs to have a clear internal policy to make sure who gets credit and compensation for those same day postpartum rounds that cannot generate a separate charge. So I know that some of your groups have call coverage and coverage for one another. So you'll just want to think through how you manage that and with regards to commission if you pay your group on commission. Again, this should be a minor thing, and at the end of the day, it probably all evens out amongst providers in a multi-group setting, but you just want to think through that on at least setting expectations, right? So obviously internal compensation conversation that you can have. And again, something that's important to bring up now, obviously not going into effect until January. All right, so let's talk about the workflow for this. So we're going to talk about 3 steps that you can use and go from there. So, all right, first you want to really make sure that you have discipline around timestamps, right? So providers do have to timestamp delivery notes and rounding notes because that calendar date is going to become important. And so, again, that midnight threshold then becomes critical. So every postpartum note on the same calendar date cannot be separately billed, but without timestamps, your billing team or even the office is not going to know or remember what they can bill for. And so really, really critical to have timestamps. And most of your notes probably already do this, but you just want to double check. Now, the second thing is that you really want to make sure that with your billing team, there's a process to make sure that we're not, accidentally billing that postpartum on the same day. And so before dropping any hospital for a postpartum patient, we're going to have billing verify what is the date of delivery. And if the delivery date equals the rounding date, you're going to obviously scrub that charge. So we'll want to have either an automated rule built into the EHR if that's possible, or a manual review. Hopefully, as these rules get put into place, we'll have those edits and rules that we can add to the clearinghouse or to the practice management software. Now, the last thing is just daily L&D reconciliation. So the same day reconciliation process from the labor management episode is going to apply here, right? So you're going to be tracking those delivery dates, those rounding dates, and those provider by patient daily so that you can catch any issues from a claim perspective ahead of time. Obviously, this is not something we want to wait until denials show up. You want to be able to create this process so that you again, clearly have those timestamps and clearly aren't billing deliveries and those postpartum checkups on the same date. A lot of this information is exactly why we're talking about this now in July and not in January, because we want to make sure that you guys have time to set up the huddles, right? Like, I think listening to these podcasts, share them with your OB friends, come to the webinar, and then really get a game plan, which is what you guys are going to walk away from in the webinar of, okay, these are the numbers I need to pull today. These are the levels of communication that I need to have with my team. This is what we're going to be building between July and the end of the year, just to make sure folks are aware of the changes in the workflows that are going to change. And that way, when you start January, it is like easy peasy. We've talked to our team. We've got a plan. We're documenting appropriately, and now we're going to be dropping those bills correctly. So, like I said, webinar registration link in the show notes, and it will be July 7th at 5 p.m. Eastern. So obviously, we've talked about the same-day billing trap, but what I hope that this brings is revenue for you guys that you weren't able to capture before. And really, this is around complex patients who are in multiple days in a row or who have things that you're managing outside of the delivery that makes it easier to capture. So that's what our team is hopeful for. We're hopeful that this gets you guys the revenue you deserve for the complexity of patients that you're already managing. So one key thing here that I really do think the model pays for that the old one did not is that every hospital rounding day after that delivery date is a new billable E&M. And so under the global model, right, those days were included. And so if a patient was in for 3-4 days, they, may, you're managing those patients, but you're getting the same global fee as if that patient had, been in for a day or two. And so obviously this newer model does give you that capability of billing that separate charge for the days of visits that are extended. And so I do think that this is an option or an opportunity to capture that revenue because those extended stays from complications like a postpartum hemorrhage or severe preeclampsia or wound infection or NICU situation. So every additional day is an additional charge. And so the complexity of those postpartum encounters now matters. And that's what I'm hopeful for. So managing a patient with severe postpartum hypertension is no longer going to be the same as like a routine 24-hour stay. And outpatient postpartum visits, the 2-week and 6-week checkups are now individually billable E&M encounters. So you are going to want to make sure, especially if clinically indicated, those are coming back. And again, you can do some of those telehealth, but that way it's just not being absorbed into the global fee, especially if you have postpartum complications that you're managing. So just, to sum this all up, postpartum billing aligns with the work that you're actually doing. So it's going to reward you for those complex patients that you're documenting, extended stays. Just be careful of that same day rules. We just want to really make sure that you understand that rule, that you have a process in place to make sure that we're not double billing and getting that time-stamped information over to both your documentation as well as to your billing team. And last but not least, we will be doing 2 more of these episodes and being able to wrap this up with the webinar next week so that you guys are all prepared for January 1. As always, hopefully you enjoyed this podcast. We would love it if you'd share it with OB friends of yours so that everybody is ready for January. Hopefully you guys have a great rest of your day and a great 4th of July holiday.